Ladies and gentlemen, how are you? Can you hear me? Good. My name is Lauren Schoenberg. I'm the founding director and senior scholar at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. Thank you very much for coming. This is the culminating event of three in a series that's been going on for a few years here, funded by the Louis Armstrong Educational Foundation. And it's Pioneers of Jazz. And I'm going to introduce your host for this evening, a wonderful scholar, bassist, band leader, arranger, Allison Lee.
Jazz music is a very personal music, and I consider my orchestra as my hands. Like a Buddhism, female Buddha has like 1,000 hands so that they can help others. It's the same kind of things. I feel each instrument is an extension of my hand. When I was young, I used to think I'm a musician first, woman second, and then a member of the society. Now I believe that I'm a member of the society, then I'm a woman, then I'm a musician. So what I like to be, and I think my probably is most important work, is I like to have a reflection of my thought, what happened in a society. And because I'm a jazz player, I like to record that in the jazz language. I think it's the most important thing I learned is I cannot write for phantom orchestra. I have to have the musicians, and each one has a little bit different sound, and each one has a little bit different idiosyncrasy. Their sound is a part of my music.
Like we really do.
Sometimes I will have a criticism. People will say my music is too hard. But I feel that it's I as a writer, and then I have orchestra of my own. And to me, to write music and they to play it, is I will get a benefit because they play my music. But I think it should be two-way street. I feel that was I have to give them something, return to they giving me a lot. So I'm trying to write a little bit above what I think they are, and where they are. And by doing this, they become a little more accomplished player than yesterday. And I think we grow together.
I hope that gave you a pretty good insight into Toshiko Akiyoshi and her general philosophy when it comes to arranging, writing music, and performing with a band full of musicians that she knows and she loves. But let's start way back at the beginning of her life. Toshiko was born on December 12th, 1912 in Manchuria. And this is actually, so she's a Japanese person, but she wasn't actually born in Japan. Her family was Japanese. She was actually born in Manchuria. And she was born the last of 4 daughters. And they all went to school in Dalian, which is about 40 minutes away by bus. And so it was a pretty far commute, but they all went to an all-Japanese school there. She tells this funny story in one of the interviews that I read about how her dad, like any typical Japanese man, actually really wanted to have a boy. But then they had a girl, and 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 Toshiko was the last girl. So after that, they kind of gave up. They're like, all right, I guess we were destined to have 4 daughters. And she mentions as well that she was the actually only really musically inclined one, although her eldest sister really enjoyed Japanese opera, and her second eldest sister was very versed in Japanese traditional music, and Japanese traditional dance, for that matter. Her father, though, was a student in no drama, which is another kind of Japanese traditional music. It's a kind of singing, actually, and drama performance that comes very much from like your whole stomach and your throat, and it makes this very kind of like sound that I definitely am not going to try and imitate for you right now because that would be very embarrassing. But so her father had a job in Old Manchuria, and today that's called the Liaoning province of China. And he had a job at a cotton textile company. And when she was in 6th grade, then he became independent. He started his own company, and it was more like a trading company. But while he was doing that, Toshiko was at home, she was studying, she was going to school. And when she was in first grade, she saw a third grade student play Mozart's Turkish March. And she loved it, and she said, wow, that is how I want to play the piano. I want to be able to play that song. And so that's when she started taking piano lessons. But she had no piano teacher, she had no official private lesson teacher. The only one that was available for her to learn from was her music teacher at school. And this was kind of like your general band director. But she notes that she would go to his house about twice a week and learn how to play from his upright piano. She would have to walk half an hour to get to his house, but she mentioned that this was always a worthwhile trek to go and listen to the music. She was also very into Beethoven, so those were kind of two of her biggest pianist influences, Beethoven and Mozart. But she identified more with Beethoven because she felt like she actually compares Beethoven and Mozart similar to John Coltrane and Sonny Rollins, where she says, Mozart, everything he played was beautiful. It always sounded like angels, kind of like Sonny Rollins. But she very much more identified with Beethoven, who she compared as more similar to John Coltrane, where there would just be stuff he did that was like, whoa, I can't believe that happened, or whoa, I can't believe he went there. And she identified more with that than she did with Mozart's. She also was attending high school during World War II, and this was a very tense time socially in the world, so much so that at the end of her high school senior year, she actually didn't graduate. She graduated honorary, and that was because the war had just ended. She basically, and a bunch of her classmates didn't end up going to school for the last couple of remaining months of school, but they all graduated anyway, so their school called them honorary graduates. She mentions that she wasn't going to school in Japan, so she has no experience of the air raid or severe conditions because Manchuria was pretty kind of offset from all of it, doing pretty okay. She doesn't remember having a problem with shortage of food or anything like that, and so she actually decided during her senior year that she was going to start training as a nurse for the war. She mentions that she kind of saw women in this period of time as having two options during the war. You could either sew clothes for soldiers or clothes for other people, or you could become a nurse. And so she asked her dad, can I be a nurse? Mom said yes, even though Mom hadn't said yes. And he was like, okay, if Mom says yes, you can be a nurse. And then she went to Mom, and she was like, oh, Dad said I can be a nurse. Can I be a nurse? And Dad was like, oh, if Mom said so, then you can go and do it. So she did kind of pull a little prank on her parents, I will say. But she went to nursing school, and at the end of nursing school, the war had ended. So there was no need for her to be a nurse anymore. But during this time, in a kind of period of chaos, she talks about how there is a period of time where their house was occupied by the Soviet army, the Russian soldiers, and they would ransack the house. And so she describes that she lived in a kind of house that had these tatami mats, and underneath them they had just like the wooden flooring, and there was a gap underneath the floor that was a little space, and that's where her family would hide anytime their house was ransacked, either by the Soviet army or the Chinese Communist army or the Chinese Nationalist army that all occupied their house at several times. So in 1946, their family was permitted to leave Manchuria, and so they moved back to Japan. They had basically lost everything in the war. They had lost their house, they had lost all their possessions, and they could only travel to Japan with whatever that they could carry. So they basically didn't have anything. And so when they came back to Japan, the government gave everybody who had come back into the country 1,000 yen per person, so there was only 6,000 yen for the whole family. And this was basically enough to feed them for about 1 month. Her parents had wanted her to go to medical school, but this was a very strange time because her father, she mentions that her father didn't really know how to reconcile with having lost everything and not being able to provide for his family and having to have left his job behind in Manchuria. And so she was walking in a city called Beppu, and she saw a flyer posted on the wall that said, "Pianist wanted." And so she said, "I play the piano." And she went in, and they were like, "Do you play piano?" And she was like, "Yes." And they were like, "You're hired. That's it." They didn't even listen to her play. And that's because there were just no musicians in that town at the time. So it was pretty easy for her to get hired. And this was her first job. This was kind of her first working experience as a pianist. And this was at a small U.S. military camp. Americans could not go into Japanese places, and Japanese people could also not go into American places. And the Japanese saw the Americans in their dance halls and said, hey, I want to dance too. That sounds fun. That looks really fun. Look at them having a great time. And so the Japanese opened these dance halls that only the Japanese could get into. And so her first job was working at one of these. And she mentions that there was an Army-Navy hit kit of popular songs, which was basically a collection of lead sheets, so similar to, for example, a fake book that a jazz musician maybe would have. And it would have chord changes of popular American songs. And this is kind of where she learned some of the first repertoire that she would play in the dance hall with the musicians around her. She'd also never seen chord symbols before. So she describes this as kind of the beginning of her jazz study. She walked in and she said, hey, I've never seen that chord symbol before. And one of the other musicians in the band was like, oh, you can't play piano. You don't know what you're doing. She was like, yes, I can. And then she sat down and played Beethoven's Third Symphony. And then they were like, okay, you're good. You can play piano. When jazz was reaching other countries, namely Japan, it reached mostly the upper middle class of young people. And so one of her friends, Mr. Fukui, played her Teddy Wilson's Sweet Lorraine, and she heard it and she fell in love with Teddy Wilson's beautiful style of playing lines and harmony, and she wanted to play just like that, and that was kind of her introduction to jazz music. She moved to Fukuoka city at 17, and she was hired there, and her parents were not happy because, like I said before, they still wanted her to go to medical school, but she moved anyway. Because of the war had changed the societal structure of Japan. And so the Japanese had never thought that they were going to lose the war. And so in the ruins of their city, they kind of were struggling to figure out how to navigate normal life after the war ended. And so this kind of pushed a lot of women in Japan into the public sphere of labor, into the working scene. And so her taking a job as a pianist wasn't just, I'm disobeying my father and I'm choosing to play music, which is the thing that I like. It was actually a way of her continuing to provide her own education for herself and provide for herself and her family. And so she took a job in the dance hall here, and this is when she kind of began to learn how to improvise. She was listening to a lot of Teddy Wilson. She was finding records, hanging out with her friend, Master Fukui, and he had also sent her a book that was called How to Play Jazz Piano. I actually think my mom has a copy of this book that I looked at when I was younger, and so I am a little bit familiar with what was inside this book. And this was kind of like a method book, and this is the way that she learned different styles of jazz music. She learned the ragtime, the cha-cha from this book, and it was very exciting to her. So she copied and learned everything down from that book in 1 week, and then she mailed it back to her friend. And he came up to her at their next rehearsal, and he was like, "Oh, I guess did you not like the book or something? I didn't really know. You sent it back to me." And she was like, "No, I just learned everything from it already." And he was like, "Wow, I feel like a professor." And that was a great moment for him. But her process of improvising was kind of fake it till you make it at first. She had no experience with improvising. She was classically trained, and so she would basically take all of it from the record. And this took a long time for her. She says that she didn't have that quick of ears, and so she would listen to it, play it, and then write it down on the sheet music. And when she had a full, completed copy of what was on the sheet music, then she would try and attempt to play the whole tune. And if this is probably a very daunting project, I imagine that took several hours, so a lot of props to her for that. She also mentions that she had no discrimination. She had no idea of what styles of music she didn't like and what she did like and didn't like, because there was just so little access to music that she could listen to in Japan. Because like I said earlier, it was very hard to come across these records. Basically, a record in Japan would be about 3,000 yen. And for context at the time, if let's say you were an Ivy League graduate and you just got a job at the bank, your first month, your salary would be 6,000 yen. So a record would cost about half of your monthly salary, and so that was a hefty fee. And so to learn music, she actually wanted to move to Tokyo because she believed this is where she would have a larger, greater access. And so she copied everyone she could, and she describes how she wanted to move to Tokyo because there would be better opportunities there. Jazz is a social music, and to learn it and to become better at it, you surround yourself with people who are better than you. And there was nothing left in this city for her to learn, so she moved to Tokyo. She had a really nice recommendation letter sent from her friend, and she joined a band in Tokyo. The #1 pianist in Tokyo was Mr. Matsui, and he didn't teach, but he was considered the best pianist at that time in Tokyo. And so she would follow him around, go to his gigs, see him perform, and he was like, I don't really teach, but you can come to all my shows for free, I'll let you come in. And so she went, and she was like, yeah, I'm gonna learn how to play just like him. And what ended up happening, which was really funny, is that she began to sound like him, and so other musicians would be like, oh, you sound like him. I'm going to hire you for this gig instead because he's a little too busy. And so she got a lot of work experience this way. She also became his successor in a sorts because Mr. Matsui became very successful. He actually was hired by a movie company, and so he would write songs for movies and films. And once he left Tokyo to go do that, then she kind of took all of the gigs that he had in that area. And there was another pianist as well named Akimitsu at Tokyo Jive, which is the club that he played at. I like the name of the club, Tokyo Jive. I think that's fun. He came up to her, and he was like, maybe we should switch jobs here. And she was like, oh, why? And he basically said, they're playing bebop music. That's not real music. We have to switch jobs. I just want to play swing dance hall music. And she said, well, I don't know what that is, but I guess I can't judge it if I haven't tried it. So she agreed to let them switch positions in the band. And so she joined the band that he was in, which was called the Ichiban Octet. And they played bebop music. And this was her first experience playing in a band that was predominantly black people instead of Japanese people. And the reason for that is because there were black soldiers that were coming through either on the USO tours that were happening or just soldiers that were coming in to serve in Japan. And so this is the first time that she really felt like she was in a jazz band. She really enjoyed playing in this band because all of the solos were written out, but they were all kind of stolen from the very hip records at the time. So one of her most favorites was, there's this tenor player in the band that was named Shin Matsumoto, and he had written out this Illinois Jackie solo, and she thought it was super hip. She was like, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. I am super excited to hear more of and play more of this music. And then she heard on the Armed Forces radio service in 1951, Bud Powell's rendition of Body and Soul. And this completely stopped her in her tracks. She immediately fell in love with his technique and his style of playing. And a lot of people know Toshiko as kind of Bud's disciple. So this is when it began in 1951 in Japan. And she would basically go to this jazz coffee shop. This was the only place that she could listen to a lot of records in Japan because she suspected that the guy that owned the jazz coffee shop was actually buying all of these jazz records on the black market because she was like, how could this coffee shop that only seats 6 people at a time have this many records? But they had a lot of records, and they had a lot of Bud Powell records. And so she would sit in this coffee shop for hours upon hours. She would go there and get a coffee. And this is when she would have her coffee and she would have her manuscript paper and she would sit there and she would transcribe. And if you've ever transcribed before, literally anything, it doesn't have to be music, even words, it's very, very difficult to get the whole thing down on your first try. So she was notorious for continuing to ask the owner again and again, can you play it again? Can you play it again? To which his response was always an enthusiastic yes. And so she would spend hours here at this very small jazz coffee shop just listening to records. She was in a couple bands in Tokyo, and she never stayed for long. It was maybe 3 months at a time. 6 months was probably the longest time that she was actually formally with the band before moving on to a different gig, moving on to another band, playing a different show with them. The first one that she joined in 1950 was the Blue Coats Orchestra. This was a dance band, and her condition to this band was, if you're going to hire me, you have to give me an advance because I want to buy a piano, and I don't have a piano. So they gave her the advance. And she was sleeping in a rental home. There are a lot of wealthy people in Tokyo at this time, and she was renting out one of their kind of upstairs attics that they had renovated. And so she describes that she was sleeping in this room, and all there was in the room was a mattress and her brand new upright piano. And this was an incredibly exciting time in her life. Then she joined a band called the Gay Stars. She stayed there for a couple months. And then she joined this band called the Six Lemons. And the Six Lemons were supposed to be the best young players that played at a new nightclub that opened in Ginza. And one of the nights that they were playing, Oscar Pettiford, the incredible bass player Oscar Pettiford, came with his troops to play at the Ernie Pyle Theater, where Japanese could not get in but she had her American groupies with her, and they were like, you have to, like, we'll get you in, don't worry. And so they helped her get in backstage, and she listened to them, and she was able to kind of meet some of them before the show. And what's funny about this is that this is her first occurrence actually seeing people warm up. She would be like, hi, Oscar Pettiford, I'm Toshiko. And they'd be like, hello, sorry, I have to go warm up. And she was like, wow, this is really incredible to see these incredible musicians like playing long tones before their set. This was something she'd never seen before. So this was an incredible experience in a couple of ways. Oscar Pettiford was in this band, so was J.J. Johnson, so was Howard McGee, so was Rudy Williams, Charlie Rice, and Skeeter Best on guitar. And they were coming into town for their USO tour, kind of like a U.S. ambassador tour for playing for troops in the post-war era. And so she kind of invited them to come to the nightclub and hear her play. And this is when word got out about her, both in Japan and also in America, because she was meeting all these incredible musicians. She heard them play, and she said, I'm playing with the Six Lemons at this nightclub. You guys should come watch as well. And so they came after, and they were like, wow, you really like Bud Powell? She was like, yeah, I do. And then she was like, how's Miles Davis doing? And they were like, oh, he's not working. And then that was about the entire conversation that they had with each other. But still one of the best experiences for her in terms of hearing music and hearing musicians play that were coming from out of Japan. And in 1953, this is when she kind of decided she wanted to play her own music. She named her group the Cozy Quartet because it was a very small group. And at this point, she was the top called side person and player in Japan at the time. And I've been talking a lot about how she sounded very similar to Bud Powell and how she was learning to play like that. And what I want to play for you now is a video that I found. It's a pretty rare recording from 1967 where she went to Europe. And she performed this song called The Village that's actually based on a Japanese folk song. So I hope you enjoy. Give her a round of applause. Another thing that happened in 1953 was the first opening of a live house, which is what they were called in Japan, the spaces for people to play music. So this was the first jazz live house that opened in Tokyo, which opened actually in West Ginza. And at the same time that had just started to take off, Norman Granz, who is this incredible American producer, also led the Jazz at the Philharmonic. He brought the Jazz at the Philharmonic to play for 3 nights in Japan. And this was the first group that came to Japan, an American jazz group that came to play that wasn't actually on a USO tour. And so he brought the Oscar Peterson Trio, he brought Ella Fitzgerald, Flip Phillips, Ben Webster, Roy Eldridge, Charlie Shavers, a lot of amazing people were there. And someone actually had brought Oscar Peterson and Flip Phillips to the live house where Toshiko was performing with her ensemble. And Oscar Peterson came again to her next show and invited her to the hotel at 3 p.m. And said, Norman Granz, you have to record this young lady. She's incredible. And Norman was like, you know, I usually have to hear people before I record them, but I trust Oscar Peterson. He said, yeah, I don't have to hear you. So we're going to Hong Kong for our tour, but we'll come back the week after that. And you can have Oscar Peterson's rhythm section. So at the time, he was playing with the trio. This was a no-drum trio, drumless trio. And so she recorded her first ever record under Norman Granz's guidance with Herb Ellis, the guitarist, Ray Brown, the bassist, and J.C. Hurd, who was playing in the big band at the time with the Jazz at Philharmonic. They had no rehearsal because the band had gone to Hong Kong and they were just coming back. And Norman didn't like to do very many takes, so he would basically be like, we're going to play this tune once, you're going to take 6 choruses, that's going to be it. And then she was very, very, very nervous for this first recording. But the band was very supportive. The rhythm section was very supportive of her. And the first tune on this album, fun fact, is actually listed as Toshiko's Blues. This is where Norman Granz kind of messed up. This is actually a tune called Bud's Blues that was composed by Sonny Stitt, but she believes that maybe Sonny Stitt didn't copyright the tune. And so Norman Granz heard it and was just like, okay, we're just going to name it Toshiko's Blues. It'll be the first song on your first record. So I'm going to bring my incredible band out, and we're going to play you Toshiko's Blues. One, two, 1, 2, 3. How about that for that incredible, my incredible band? I'm going to introduce them for you now. Over here, filling the roles of Toshiko Akiyoshi, this is Maxwell Holmes. Max has also helped me with like half of the arrangements for this ensemble, so I can't thank him enough for helping me out with this project and also just being an incredible musician and arranger. Another person who's helped me out with this series of concerts immeasurably is Grace Rock on the trombone. Give her a round of applause. Grace is more like my co-director than anything because every time I have an idea or something, I run it by her. And she's helped me with so many of these in the past. Last week, we celebrated Tiny Davis here. And the week before that, we celebrated Melba Liston. So that week, Grace was filling in for Melba Liston. So she's been an incredible help on this project. On the trumpet, we have Mejidi Owusu. Like I mentioned before, last week we celebrated Tiny Davis, so Mejidi was filling in the shoes of Tiny Davis last week. And a new addition to our band is Gustavo Cruz on the tenor saxophone. And later he's going to play some flute for you, and I'll explain why in a little bit. And over there, bassist's best friend, I just call myself a drummer, bassist's best friend, Oscar Ible on the drums. Like I said earlier, jazz is very much a social art. The reason that all of us are in New York is because we understand that to be able to improve at jazz music, you have to surround yourself with people who are better than you. And this was actually something that Toshiko kind of followed this philosophy for most of her life, at least while she was in Japan. She moved from, can't even remember where she lived before, but she moved a couple times while she was in Japan, always searching out kind of a bigger pond as an ever-growing fish, if you understand where that reference is coming from. But while she was in Tokyo, there is an American guitarist whose name was Tony, and he suggested, hey, you should write to Berklee and try and go there because this is where you'll keep learning most. And there's a school program that's there, and maybe you would do well there. So she wrote a letter to Lawrence Burke, Mr. Burke, who was the founder of the school, and she had him proofread it, and she was like, this is probably the worst thing I've ever written. My English is terrible. And he was like, it's fine. Send it anyway. And she sent the letter, and she had sent one of her records as well, the record that she had just released under Norman Granz's label. And, in those days, it was pretty incredulous for a Japanese person to be playing jazz, let alone a Japanese woman. And you couldn't believe that at the time, and especially because Norman Granz had just recorded her, who was this big name in America. And so the school had a lot of reason to pay attention to her. So they saw her, they got their letter, they read her letter, and they listened to her album. And so she got a full scholarship to basically advertise the school internationally. And so she had to fill out her student visa. She had to fill out an F1. I'm also an international student, so I know the feeling. And that finalized, and in 1956, so a couple years after she had sent the letter, in January, she flew to Boston. And so a lot of the newspapers that I saw, actually, because she was already kind of internationally a big deal at this time, they welcomed her with open arms. And this is a time, post-war, post-World War II, and knowing the historical context behind that war, I was just very fascinated that the Americans were so welcoming to her. Not that that's a bad thing, of course, but just because given what we know about America and Japanese, the tension and the conflicts that had happened between them during that time, I was very fascinated by that. And so in talking to the academic consultant for this series, Dr. Tammy Kernodle, who's an incredible musicologist who teaches at the Miami University in Ohio, she kind of explained to me why this was the case and how jazz operates within a larger subculture as part of a broader culture. This is also the Berklee School of Music.
Well, I think that is a representation of how a subculture like music can have its own community and its own communal ranks. When we look at jazz, the jazz is what we see as a functioning subculture has all of these kind of social hierarchies, or we have cliques or communities. And by virtue of the fact that she was connected sonically, but also professionally and personally to established jazz artists, it allowed Toshiko to navigate certain politics she wouldn't have been able to. It legitimized her in a way that some women could not be. Your proximity to an established musician, the way that Melba's relationship with Dizzy worked in her favor, the way in which Melba's relationship to Mary Lou Williams, to Quincy Jones. So when you have someone saying that you're sonically linked to someone established, and then you have an established musician who makes entree to you in that community, it provides you a certain level of protection. It allows people to hear you differently through this, and it's to see you differently. And I think that's what we see with her. That doesn't match what is the fallout for most Japanese Americans at the time, because most Japanese Americans are dealing with the trauma of internment, the trauma of second-class citizenry, the trauma that comes with having lost everything, because we don't talk about what internment was. People lost everything. They lost their homes. They lost their way of living. They lost their family members. And so in the carnage of the afterlife of World War II, you have this woman who has come to America. And it's interesting how the jazz press talks about her, because in some ways what they do is that they create space for her.
One of the pieces that she wrote when she was in America after she had moved is a piece called Lady Liberty, which she wrote for the Statue of Liberty's 100th anniversary. So in light of her moving to America, we're going to play that for you now. One of Toshiko's highlights when she was living in America is when she went to see Bud Powell play in person. So she was friends with Ed Thigpen, who was the drummer at the time, and the way that she became friends with him was because Ed Thigpen was actually serving in the Korean War, which I didn't realize. And when he was in Japan, he met Toshiko and said, "Hey, can I sit in with you?" And she was like, "Of course you can." And they played together, and that's how they became friends. So now that she had moved to America, she had really wanted to come see him play with Bud Powell. And he was like, "Yeah, you can come sit in." And she was like, "I played the worst rendition of I Remember April I've ever played in my entire life," and I just heard Bud laughing behind me. But when I turned around to look at him, he took a deep bow, which in her culture was a sign of respect. And then, funny story, he would start coming down to listen to her play on his set breaks. And then at the shows that he was playing, no one could find him because he would forget about his own show, and he would just continue watching her play. And they were always like, "Oh my God, where'd he go?" And meanwhile, he was listening to Toshiko. And this happened quite a few times, she said. But at the time, she would listen to him. She would go listen to him so that she could learn something. She was always seeking to learn out things, seeking to be a fish in a bigger pond. And his case of listening to her and going to see her was more of the fact that he had heard someone playing, right, that obviously had his influence. And she wasn't from America, and so she had some different influences as well. And so he was going to see, how can someone that kind of sounds like me or comes from like the same influences that I come from also have a completely different demographic, and what does she bring to the picture that I could learn from? So in that way, they remained very close friends. They were always learning from each other. So one time he listened to a tune that she had wrote called Studio J, and asked her, "Did you write that song?" And she said yes. And he said, "You're the best female piano player I've ever seen." And that carried with her for a very, very long time. Even when she wanted to quit, she was like, "Well, I guess Bud Powell said I'm pretty good, so I have to keep going." So maybe do meet your heroes is the lesson here. But we're going to play a tune that she recorded on an album called Remembering Bud. And this is her arrangement of Cleopatra's Dream. There they are. anytime Toshiko would play a concert in New York or in Boston, everyone was like, oh my God, it's the female version of Bud Powell. And she was like, that's no good. My name's Toshiko. Maybe I should start learning how to sound something like myself or develop my own voice. And to do that, to figure that out, she decided to start writing her own music. After graduating, she moved to New York, and she originally had planned on moving back to Japan, but then she reflected on her 4 or 5 years in New York, and she was in Boston, and she was like, I haven't learned anything, so I can't give back to my community if I have nothing to give them. So she moved to New York instead. And she was barely paying the rent in New York, as a lot of us are. And in 1959, she met and married her then husband, Charlie Mariano, and had a quartet with him. And this is a song that they very oftenly played together called Long Yellow Road. It's a tune that has been known to be her signature. It's a tune that people will be like, oh, it's not a Toshiko concert if they don't play Long Yellow Road. So we're going to play it for you now. At the end of 1964, Toshiko and Mariano had separated for personal reasons, but and she had a 3.5-year-old daughter, which made making money and traveling on the road, which are two things that are very common for most jazz musicians to make money. It made it pretty much impossible, but she got by. There was always a gig, there was always a festival, there was always a trio with Elvin Jones or Miroslav that was going to prevent her from not being able to pay the rent for that month. But this is around the time when she started working with Mingus and his big band, and he was very nice to her, although a lot of people would make up stories about how he would like slam the piano lid down on her fingers. She had, on the record, he did not do this, don't worry, but he basically invited her to join his big band because he really cared about the success of the musicians around him, and he said, there's this young pianist that's doing really well. She plays very well, and I want more people to know about her, so I'm going to invite her to join my big band. He believed not only would it be a new sound for the band, but the exposure would be really good for her. And she had been in America for 10 years at this point, and still believed that she hadn't really done anything. She was like, I haven't learned anything. I feel like I haven't contributed to the music in a meaningful way. And her response to that was to plan a town hall concert that took an entire year to prepare. It took a year to gather the funds, to arrange the musicians. It was a completely self-produced concert. And at the mayor at the time was John Lindsay. And for some reason, he named that day that she was going to have the concert, October 7th, as New York's Jazz Day. So she was like, wow, this is a really good sign. I'm going to have this concert. It's going to be amazing. How could this possibly be the case? I prepared the date a year ago. And it was also a black tie, invitation-only kind of jazz concert at the Metropolitan Museum of Art happening at the same time. There was a free concert at Central Park. There was all this jazz music happening on Jazz Day of New York, October 7th, 1967. But because there were so many critics around, a lot of them ended up going to her concert. And she was like, oh, this is going to be really good. I'm going to get so much publicity for this. And they came with cameras, and they came with microphones, and they recorded some of it, and they wrote really nice reviews. John Wilson wrote a very good review of the concert. And after that, nothing happened. It didn't do anything. She says it didn't do any good. After that, I was still barely paying the rent. But this concert was significant because this is where she met her now husband, Lew Tabackin. She describes that the first time she heard him play at the half note, she was knocked out. She was like, wow, this is incredible. And so she wanted him to play on this town hall concert, but he wasn't able to make it. He was going on tour with Thad Jones and Mel Lewis's orchestra in California, so he wasn't going to be able to make the town hall day. But she hired him for a gig after that, and she describes that she was a little bit cocky. She was like, I'm this great pianist. I'm going to play a couple tunes with my trio, and then I'll invite you up to play the tune. And then he came up and just knocked her out, like completely blew her away with his incredible saxophone playing. And then he picked up the flute, and she was like, oh, God, no saxophonist can play flute very well. This is going to be terrible, sad flute. And Lew Tabackin, who was actually a flute major, kind of also blew her away, literally, with his flute playing. So she actually wrote a piece that features him for their big band that they started later on, which is called Sumi. And she was hearing this kind of, there he is. This gagaku sound, which is like Japanese classical music that came from the imperial times, and she was hearing this melody in her head, and she said, I'm kind of hearing the trumpets play this, and I want to arrange this and write this for my big band. And so this is one of the first pieces actually that she wrote that began to incorporate some of the Japanese cultural and musical elements into her compositions. So I hope you enjoy Sumi. Thank you. So after writing that beautiful tune, Toshiko decided to quit playing entirely in 1972. She decided to move to Los Angeles, and the rationale behind this was that she believed the world does not need another piano player. And I've been here for 15 years at this point, and I still haven't made an impact. I still feel like I haven't given back. And so I was very shocked but I learned that apparently she burned everything. Like, she literally lit her union contracts, her folders for the PR, everything on fire, and moved to LA in July. But while she was in LA, she met pianist John Lewis, who played with the modern jazz quartet, the MJQ. And John Lewis called her to play in a piano playhouse at Monterey, the Monterey Jazz Festival in California. And this kind of saved her career. This was the first one, the first gig that she had that was like, okay, I'll quit after this gig. And then a couple of gigs kept happening, and she kept playing, and she was like, maybe I just won't quit. Maybe I'll just keep playing. But she had a 25th anniversary celebration with her husband, Lew. They figured that they wouldn't have a 50th anniversary, and so they were like, let's go all out at this for this 25th anniversary. They threw a big party at the Essex House, which is here in New York. And at the party, John Lewis stood up and toasted to them and said, "Toshiko infused Japanese culture, so I don't have to do it." And this is when she realized, like, oh, just by me being here, maybe I have made an impact. Maybe this meant a lot to her. He thought really highly of the music that she made and the elements of Japanese culture that she had infused into her music. If we think about music and jazz music, for example, a lot of jazz music is a mixture between cultures. It's a mixture of Black American music, there's Afro-Caribbean music, there's Afro-Cuban music. And so John Lewis really believed that Toshiko was adding Japanese influence and Japanese culture to a broad lineage of jazz music. In 1974, one of Toshiko's biggest influences passed away. This was Duke Ellington. And he was one of the biggest influences on her writing. She was so impressed by his orchestration. And the other thing that she was very inspired by was how proud Duke was of his race, of being a Black American, so much so that he wrote songs about it in full movements. For example, Black Butterfly and Black Tan and Beige Fantasy. And she started to think, maybe I should stop looking at my own heritage as a handicap. Maybe I should start taking pride in my heritage. And because she had been raised in Japan with this belief that if you were a Japanese person playing jazz, that was a handicap. You were at a disadvantage, because how could you ever play jazz music properly if you were not of American born, if you were not of the same history that Black American music comes from. And so she decided, this is maybe when I'm going to start putting Japanese influence into music. She realized also at this time that she was very susceptible to social issues, and she wanted to make music that expressed her point of view on these things, which is, I think, what she was talking about in the clip that I showed you at the very beginning of this presentation. She began to look at her heritage as her asset rather than her handicap. Maybe I can bring something into jazz tradition, which was Japanese culture, which was never a part of it before. And maybe her job now would be to infuse something into the rest of jazz. And she was very careful about this approach. She believed that it was kind of like coloring. This is a quote that she says in her NEA Jazz Master interview. Japanese culture, you can only do coloring, not like some Brazilian music, took over the jazz scene at one point. But not like that, just coloring. It is like, for example, if you eat something that doesn't belong, like a stone or whatever it is, it gets stuck in your throat, and it can't be like that. Music has to be something without any resistance. It has to go natural to the ear. And just like something unnatural and there's something there that doesn't belong, it's going to get stuck, and it shouldn't be like that. So this is around the time when she started writing full, longer orchestrations and longer pieces. And she used a lot of actually traditional Japanese instruments and no singing. And the Suzumi taiko drum, I think I have some, oh, there we go. There's the Suzumi drum. And she began using some of these instruments in her compositions and her longer works. One of the suites that she wrote that I found that I really liked listening to is called Minemata. And it's actually a city in Japan, kind of on the coast. And Minemata disease was later realized to be this neurological disease caused by severe mercury poisoning. It was first discovered here, but basically there is this corporation, the Chiso Corporation, and they were dumping methyl mercury in the industrial wastewater from a chemical factory. And this went on for about 34 years, from 1932 to 1968. And so there was a whole class action lawsuit that happened against the corporation, and it was this whole thing. But Toshiko had began to realize that she wanted to speak up on social issues. She wanted to tell stories through her music, and so her suite Minamata was kind of an homage to that. And we're going to play, it is a 20-minute long movement, and I don't have to look at the clock to know that we don't have 20 minutes. So we're going to play the first movement and a bit of the second movement for you right now. Toshiko often felt like American audiences were going to put down her music, but she did not care. She believed that she was the first listener, and so anything that she produced, she had to be happy with before she put it out. She wanted the music that she made to feel authentic to her. It was programmatic music, and so what was most important to her was always the message and telling the story of the music, and making sure that she identified with it personally so that other people could also then identify it when she made it more public. If she wasn't true to her music, she wouldn't be worthy of it, and so that was more important to her than what the audience thought. There's a lot of newspapers that she read when she was in America that questioned her ethnicity and authenticity playing jazz. When she had received the Mademoiselle Award in Boston in January, she became an ASCAP member. There was a journalist that wrote an article basically questioning why she was getting so much attention compared to the other Bostonian musicians that were around her. And so this is when she began to actually believe that being a Japanese person made you stick out, made you look different, and so then you would be treated differently, and then even if, no matter what, people would always be questioning, are you good enough, are you more authentic enough, are you getting more attention because of this, you know, there's two spectrums of it, and it's basically a lose-lose situation. But eventually she decided just to accept it. She believed that if she had no control over what someone thought about her, she couldn't do anything about it, and so she wasn't going to worry about it. I don't have time to play the whole clip for you, but I spoke to Dr. Kernodle about this, and Dr. Kernodle said in an interview to me and Grace that Toshiko was very radical because she was unapologetic about who she was, and she did not assimilate to American culture. She was a disruptor just when she was in the room, and when her energy was there, all of a sudden the energy around her changed. Just her presence in a room or just in an ensemble already changed the energy of the music and the energy of the people around her. And especially when she sat down to play the piano, then that disrupted what people thought of how if women could play jazz, and if Japanese people could play jazz, and if Japanese women could play jazz. And so just by Toshiko existing, she didn't even have to say anything. She just had to show up, and she just had to play the piano. She would already disrupt the energy and the thinking of the people around her, despite if their biases were ignorant or not ignorant or not. And as women ourselves, we have power to do this. She was also influenced by everything that she believed that everything that she came across, if she saw it once, it would influence her. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so she actually wrote this piece. It's called Hiroshima. And it was a suite. It's a 20-minute long suite. And it was commissioned by a priest that she met who sent her a photo of the Hiroshima bombing. And when she looked at it, she was like, there's no way I can write anything like this. This is horrible. I don't know what to say. I don't think I could say anything that has meaning. But then she came across this photo. Let me find it. And it's of a woman smiling, coming out of the underground with a little smile on her face. And I actually looked into this photo, and her smile is completely fake, but the photographers were going to send this photo to the Time magazine, and they were like, you have to smile for the photo so that we can put it on the magazine. And so she did. Eventually, this woman died of leukemia from the radiation poisoning a couple years after this photo was taken. But when Toshiko saw this, she said that this photo represented hope to her. And so she wrote a tune that she played solo at the end of every concert that she gave after she wrote this piece in 2001. And so we're going to end the concert for you by playing a very short rendition. Or, well, I'm not going to play it because I don't play piano. But Max is going to play a very short rendition of Toshiko Akiyoshi's Hope as the last movement from her Hiroshima Rising from the Abyss suite. I'm going to introduce my band one more time. Over there on piano, give him another round of applause. Maxwell Holmes. Over here on the drums and cymbals, Oscar Evely. Thank you to my wonderful rhythm section who have endured my chaotic nature of organizing things for 3 weeks now. Grace Rock as well on the trombone. Mejidu Usu on the trumpet. And Gustavo Cruz on the saxophone and flute. Again, thank you so much to Lauren Schoenberg, Zeke, Ivania, everybody who works here, and to the Jazz Museum as a whole for letting me crash your party for the past 3 weeks. And thank you to Dr. Colonel for being such an incredible help on this project. This project has quite literally been a huge labor of love, but I'm so grateful to all of my, it takes a village, and so I'm very grateful to my village for helping me through these 3 weeks and helping me put together some of the most meaningful tribute concerts I've ever done. My name is Allison Lee. Thank you so much for being here. This concludes the Women in Jazz series at the Jazz Museum. And you don't have to stay here, but you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So yeah, get out of here. Bye.
Just a quick note, folks. I just want to say on behalf of the Jazz Museum and the Louis Armstrong Educational Foundation, 2 things. First of all, how many folks are here for the first time tonight? Hey, okay. Hope you'll become members. You go to our website, become members of what we do up here. We need your support. And so please consider checking out our events. But most importantly, the wonderful scholarship, leadership, and just how she's put these things together so elegantly for the last 3 weeks. And by the way, they're all online, and you can watch them and share them on the Jazz Museum YouTube website. Allison Lee. Allison, take a bow. Good night, everybody.